The owner, my wife, and I got married in 2004. At that time, I had been hired at a polymer plant in Altamira, Tamaulipas. We started looking for a house in the surroundings or in the colonies north of Tampico. We almost gave up our search when we found a house nearby and were very surprised by its price, since it was quite large, had a carport and a backyard. It was so cheap that we had no objection to buying it from the county. It would be perfectly enough to furnish it. We were very happy because we would start fixing it up and making minor repairs. It would only need paint and some plants to make it more comfortable. But one night, our hell began. We were sleeping when suddenly a noise of something crashing woke us abruptly. It sounded like a strong earthquake, so we stopped and stayed silent. Nothing happened and my wife, still scared, told me to go check. With a little fear, I got up to see what had happened. Maybe someone had stolen something, since it was a very popular colony and I thought there were a lot of thieves. But there was nothing broken, no windows, no objects disturbed inside the house. I checked that the doors were closed and returned to the room. My wife calmed down a bit, and we went to bed again. At that moment, when I was just falling asleep, we heard the noise of something breaking, but this time it sounded louder. It hadn't been our imagination, we really had heard that. So we both stopped and turned on the lights. I searched the whole house for the origin of the noise, but there was nothing. Strangely, I was about to return to the room when I felt a draft on my bare skin. When I turned, I saw the window of the room and went to check if it was closed. And suddenly, an electric current ran through my whole body. There was a person standing outside in the backyard of the house. She was a strange old woman with curly hair and a face full of wrinkles. She didn't have teeth, and her skin was as if it were rotting. Her appearance was quite sinister. I felt more panic when I heard my wife's screams. I ran to the room to see what was happening and found her crying, terrified, and crouched next to the bed. When I asked her what was wrong, she was trembling and told me that she had seen a horrible old woman through the window. She was looking at her and smiling with a mouth full of rotten teeth. At that moment, I grabbed a hammer, opened the door, and ran to the street to look for what we had seen. I ran to the corner and did several laps, but there was nothing. The dogs in the block started barking when they saw me, so I decided to go home. When I got there, I tried to calm my wife, but the truth is that we were on edge. We tried to sleep, but it was impossible. When morning came, we had breakfast and didn't talk about it. We tried to talk about other things and not think about what we had seen. I went to work, and when I came back at night, the tension started again. We couldn't sleep, and we were a little nervous thinking about the event we had lived through. So I wanted to calm my wife a little, and we sat in the living room to watch television. Suddenly, the light went out all over the neighborhood. It was common in those areas for that to happen. So I went for a flashlight and went out to check. Indeed, everything was in total darkness. The neighbors looked at each other from afar with their lanterns, and the dogs barked non-stop. I lit a cigarette and went back home. I went to the kitchen to get some candles and other lamps. On the way, I saw my wife's shadow sitting in the living room. Without saying anything, I just saw her and said to her, "Gordo, I think the light went out in the whole neighborhood." When I entered the kitchen, I saw with surprise that my wife was there. She was lighting some candles, and then she told me, "Yes, I saw that it went out everywhere." A cold chill ran through me, and I felt a jolt of fear in my head and a bad feeling in my stomach. I grabbed a big lamp and didn't tell my wife anything about what I had seen. I just told her to wait for me there and to look for more candles. I started to pray, all the prayers I knew, and I thought about what I was going to find in the living room. But when I lit up the whole place, there was absolutely no one. Just then, my wife came in with the candles and put them on the center table. The lights returned soon, and we turned off the candles, and I went to the bedroom. She stayed watching television in the living room, but I couldn't sleep. Then I started to think that there was something strange in the house, and that was the reason why the previous owners had sold it to us so cheaply. I thought about everything: ghosts, demons, and worse things. I wasn't a believer in these things, but my wife was, and she had told me stories. I tried not to get worked up about it all, but it was possible that something was harassing us. It would be early in the morning when I woke up trembling with cold. I felt an unusual cold in the room, and it was February and there was bad weather, but not so much as to feel a cold of that type. I turned to see that my wife was covered by the blankets on her side of the bed. So I just grabbed the mattress and covered her. I went out to smoke, and I went to the kitchen, and what was my surprise when my wife was there also smoking a cigarette. My face of surprise did not escape my wife. And before I could say anything, she told me something even more scathing. "Why did you stop and leave me alone on the sofa? You scared me when you went to bed." She told me with resentment. "Me? Yes, don't do that. I was asleep, and you were sleeping with me, but you were cold. I told you, and you just stood there and went to the bedroom. Fatty, I haven't left the room. I thought you were there, and I covered you because you were cold." At that moment, we both started to panic. We looked at each other, and we understood what was happening. We put out the cigarettes, and my wife grabbed a chisel, and we went to the room. We needed to see who or what was in the bed. We slowly walked without making a sound and opened the door of the room. On the bed was a blanket lying down and covered with the mattress. Slowly I approached to uncover and see who was there, and my wife jumped back to the edge of collapse. With an interrupted voice and crying, she told me not to do it, and when I put the mattress aside, an indescribable terror invaded us both. She began to scream desperately and ran out of the house. I was petrified watching the old woman lying down and watching me with her wrinkled face and putrefied skin, and that smile, toothless, that accelerated my heart even more. She looked at me like that and covered herself slowly. And then the bulge simply disappeared in front of my eyes. The bedclothes were hanging in the bed, and at that moment, I walked out of my house looking for my wife. She was pale, and she was in total hysteria. "No mames, no mames, what was that? Let's go now." I was stunned, and I don't know why my wife's whispers made me react right away. I ran with her to get a taxi and leave. We were in our bedclothes, and as we could, we ran a long distance to the entrance of the parking lot. We boarded a taxi and went to her mother's house. There we told my in-laws and brothers-in-law what had happened. In the morning, we returned with my wife, accompanied by my brother-in-law and his girlfriend. We found the house closed. We entered and searched everywhere for whatever it was. Some hint of witchcraft, weird things. But in the end, we found nothing. At a certain point, my wife started telling me to leave everything and rent somewhere else. I refused and didn't want to leave the property because of such a thing. She looked at me and told me with determination that she was going to live at her mother's house. That was what she had to do for things to improve, and so she wouldn't feel all that evil. She didn't want to stay, and I understood her. I was too scared, so I had to stay alone in that place. The first thing I did was call the man who sold me the house. I wanted to interview him, but he refused, and I told him what had happened to me, and he laughed at me. He said he didn't know anything about what I was talking about. However, I noticed tension in his voice and he dodged the subject. I knew he was lying, and I knew that somehow he and his family had experienced, I don't know to what extent, the intrusion and the manifestations. That's why they sold us the house so cheaply. Maybe this had such a terrible story that I would never know. The atmosphere was suffocating, quite cold, and something was not right. Talking to my coworkers, they recommended me to take a curandero or someone to bless the house. They told me about a supposed witch who lived in Monte Alto, so I went to look for him and took him to the place. As soon as he entered, He said he felt the presence of evil and advised me to leave the house. I told him I did what I had to do, and that his advice was of no use to me. The man took out of his mouth a lot of esoteric weird things, liquids which he began to pour all over the house, and lit coal with herbs, and so he spent it smoking everywhere. The stench was unbearable, and after a few long prayers, he told me, "Your house is now peaceful, the evil presence has gone." I paid for the service. He left, and sincerely, I didn't want to test what he had done, but sincerely, I didn't have where to go. I was terribly scared and didn't want to get to night, so I went to the corner store and got myself a bottle of vodka to give me courage. That night I was in my room with the television on, and I was drinking one glass after another. And after midnight, I finally fell asleep. In the morning I woke up abruptly and had the need to urinate. So I got up heavily, and while I was doing my necessities, I heard some insistent knocks at the door. I got alert, and I went to see who was knocking with such insistence. When I looked out the window of the door, I could see with strangeness that it was my wife. She was standing there in the light with a disengaged face. I opened the door and tried to hug her, however she dodged me and got into the bedroom. And after that, she closed the door with confidence. Then I realized that I had been drinking alcohol, and that made her furious. I assumed I would sleep on the sofa, but at least I was calm about having my wife with me. The morning light caught my eye when I heard the phone ringing. I stopped with a sigh and answered, "Well, why don't you answer? I've been calling you. How are you? Who's calling?" "Well, it's me, your wife." "Who do you think it is?" At that moment, I felt terrible fear and started to sweat cold. I put down the phone and ran out of the house, looking out the window of my room. There I could see her. There was the old woman looking at me through the curtains, with her hair tangled and with her mouth full of rotten teeth, smiling at me. After a while, the curtain moved and she disappeared out of nowhere. For me that was enough. I had already witnessed too many paranormal phenomena. I ended up bending my hands and went to my wife, and we started renting a property in a new condo in Altamira. I put the house on sale at the same price as I bought it, so somehow I wouldn't lose the money. I never told the new owners of the paranormal situation of the house. All I wanted was to recover my money and forget about the matter. Later I found out by the newspaper that the house had been set on fire for some undetermined cause. I saw the photo and in effect where my room was completely burned. According to the witness of the lady who lived there, she had an altar with several saints, and that this one began to burn from the candle that the fire spread throughout the room. I tried not to think. I saw the photo carefully, and between the black of the ink I could distinguish a thin gray figure inside the burned room, a blurred stain that seemed to be an old woman with teeth and a smile.